The guitar hit the counter with a hollow, indifferent thud. Frank Bellini didn't look up. He turned the sunburst fender over once, the way a man handles something he's already decided to discard, ran a thumb across the frets, and set it back down on the glass case. $15. On the other side of the counter, barely tall enough to see over the display case, Danny Kowalski stood completely still. He was 11 years old, wearing his dead father's jacket, 2 sizes too large, the sleeves rolled so his hands were free. He had carried that guitar case from a $28 motel off Highland Avenue in the August heat, and had not once set it on the ground. "My father paid $85 for it," Danny said. His voice was steady. That was the only part of him that was. Frank crossed his arms. "Your father overpaid. Take the 15 or leave it." The shop went quiet, the way shops go quiet when something that shouldn't be witnessed is happening in public anyway. 2 customers near the back studied the floor. An employee in a denim vest found something urgent to examine behind the counter. Nobody moved. Nobody except one man on the left side of the store. He had been standing near the wall rack for 11 minutes, holding a slide guitar he had no intention of buying. Now, he set it down without a sound. His dark eyes moved slowly, from the boy to the guitar to Frank. Then he took one slow step forward. Nobody in that shop knew his name yet. Frank Bellini was about to find out, in a way he would not forget for the rest of his life. If you've ever watched someone be told that their most precious thing was worthless, stay right here. Because what happened next didn't just change one boy's life. It changed the man who stepped in, too. To understand what was sitting on that counter, you have to go back 6 months. February 1974. A kitchen on North Clark Street, Chicago, on a night cold enough to frost the inside of the window pane. Thomas Kowalski was 38 years old, a session guitarist who had spent 15 years chasing a sound that nobody could define, but every musician who heard it immediately recognized. He never recorded an album with his name on it. He never headlined a venue. But musicians who shared stages with him across the Midwest circuit said Thomas had hands like nobody else. Fast, feel first, always listening for the space between the notes, rather than filling it. In 1965, he scraped together 3 months of factory wages and weekend gig money from a tavern in Waukegan to buy a 1958 Fender Stratocaster. Pre-CBS production. Sunburst finish, slightly worn at the edges from the previous owner. 2 tuning pegs that needed adjustment. He paid $85. He considered it the most honest transaction of his life. For 9 years, he played it every single night. On February 14th, Valentine's Day, Thomas suffered a massive heart attack in that kitchen. He was dead before the ambulance reached the building. He left behind his wife Elena, his daughter Maria, 8 years old, whose asthma medication cost more than Elena earned in a week, and his son Danny, who was 10 on the morning of the funeral and did not speak for 3 days. Danny learned to play by sitting alone in his father's chair each evening, working through the songs from memory, from feel, from the specific silence that lives inside a house after someone who filled it is suddenly gone. By August, he could play 3 of Thomas's songs completely from beginning to end. Not perfectly, but unmistakably. Music had become the only room in the house where his father still lived. Then Elena sat him down at that same kitchen table and said the 4 words he had been dreading since February. "We need the money." Danny told her not to worry. He told her he would handle it. He did not tell her that he had already decided. Whatever that guitar brought in Los Angeles, every dollar was going toward Maria's medication. What he couldn't have known was that the guitar Frank Bellini had just called $15 of junk was worth something far greater than money. And the one man alive who could prove it had already set down the slide guitar and was moving toward the counter. Bellini's Music and Pawn sat wedged between a record store and a dry cleaner on Sunset Strip. Narrow, floor-to-ceiling with guitars on wall mounts and glass cases packed with watches and brass instruments that had outlived their owners. The shop smelled of polish and old wood. Frank Bellini had run it for 19 years. He could assess a situation in 30 seconds, not because he was perceptive, but because speed was more efficient than accuracy. Danny walked in at 2:17 in the afternoon, carrying the case with both hands, the way you carry something fragile. He set it on the counter and unclipped the latches carefully, one at a time, the same way his father always had. The guitar lay on torn red velvet lining, sunburst body, white pickguard, 3 single-coil pickups, chrome slightly tarnished. The neck was worn smooth at the first 5 frets. 10,000 hours of someone's hands pressing down on the same positions, night after night. There was a small scratch near the input jack. Danny knew exactly how it got there. His father had caught the guitar on a doorframe, coming home from a Milwaukee gig in 1969, laughing too loud at 2 a.m. to notice until it was already done. Frank picked it up the way a butcher handles a cut of meat he's already discounted. He turned it once, plucked 2 strings without plugging it in, ran a thumb down the neck, and set it back down. Fret wear's excessive. Finish is checked on the lower bout. Neck's got a back bow. Electronics are probably shot. He crossed both arms. $15. Danny blinked once. My father paid $85 for it. Your father overpaid. $15, take it or leave it. The shop went quiet the way a room goes quiet when something private is happening in public. A woman near the guitar rack turned away. The teenage boy at the back looked down at his shoes. The employee in the denim vest found something urgent to examine below the counter. Danny's voice stayed flat. It was the last thing holding. It's a 1958 Stratocaster. My dad said, "Kid." Frank leaned forward on both fists. Your daddy's guitar is a wall decoration at best. I'm doing you a favor at 15. Danny's hand moved to the case latch. He was going to close it, walk back into the August heat on Sunset Strip, and think of something else, when a quiet voice from the left side of the store said 3 words that stopped everything. May I look? If you've ever felt someone reduce the most precious thing you owned to nothing, stay right here. Because those 3 words were about to cost Frank Bellini everything. He didn't announce himself. He didn't wait for recognition. He simply moved to the counter, set both hands on the edge, and looked at the guitar with the specific stillness of someone who has spent a lifetime learning how to listen before speaking. He was 31 years old, lean, quiet, with dark eyes that settled slowly and completely on whatever they found. He lifted the Stratocaster with both hands, not testing it, receiving it. The way you pick up something you already respect before you've been given a reason to. He held it without saying a word. Frank Bellini's expression shifted. Something behind his eyes had begun working, the way a man's face works when recognition is arriving but hasn't quite landed yet. His mouth opened slightly, closed. The man said nothing for 20 seconds. He pressed his thumb along the back of the neck, reading the grain. He ran a finger across the fret ends, checking the crown, not the wear, the way someone does when they actually know what they're looking at. He held the body toward the light coming through the front window, turning it slowly, reading the ash grain beneath the sunburst finish, the way you read a sentence you want to get exactly right. Then he turned the guitar over, and on the back of the neck plate, scratched in small, careful block letters that most people would have walked right past, TK 65. He lowered the guitar slowly. He looked at Danny. What's your name, son? Danny Kowalski, sir. A pause that lasted exactly long enough to mean something. Thomas Kowalski was your father? The air inside the shop changed temperature. Danny's voice came out smaller than he intended. I didn't know him. The man turned the guitar once more in his hands. But I saw this guitar in Chicago, 1969, a session your father was playing. He told me he found it in 65, said he'd never sell it. A quiet beat. He never did. He turned to face Frank Bellini directly. Frank had gone the particular pale color of a man who now understood exactly who was standing at his counter, and exactly what the next 30 seconds were going to cost him. This is a 1958 Fender Stratocaster. The voice was level, unhurried, and carried the absolute authority of someone who has no need to raise it. Pre-CBS production, alder body, maple neck with original Klein dot inlays. The electronics are not shot. The neck relief is adjustable in 10 minutes with a truss rod. This guitar, properly set up, is worth between $800 and $1,200. One beat. You offered this boy 15. Frank said nothing. There was nothing to say. The man placed the guitar back in the case with the same care he'd used picking it up. Then he turned to Danny and crouched. Not condescendingly, simply bringing himself to eye level, the way you do when something matters enough to say directly. In 1962, he said quietly, a record label in London sat 4 boys down and told them they had no future, that their music was the wrong kind, that they were a waste of a Tuesday afternoon. The smallest pause, the weight of it settling. I was one of those boys. Danny went completely still. Every single time someone tells you something you love isn't worth anything, the man held his eyes. That is the exact moment you hold on tightest. He stood. He reached into his jacket. Without ceremony, without performance, he placed $800 in cash flat on the counter in front of Frank Bellini. That covers fair market value. A single beat of silence. I'd recommend you remember this the next time a child walks in here carrying something his father left him. Then he turned to Danny and placed the guitar directly into his hands. Not on the counter. Into his hands. This doesn't belong in a pawn shop. It belongs with you. Danny stood holding his father's guitar, tears running silently down his face, completely unable to speak. And then the front door of the shop swung open, and a woman stepped inside who had been standing at the window for the last 10 minutes, watching everything through the glass. Elena Kowalski. And the 3 words she said to the quiet man in the white linen shirt broke every single person in that room completely open. Elena Kowalski was 36 years old. She had followed Danny from the motel that morning, without telling him, staying half a block behind on the sidewalk, carrying nothing, watching her son carry everything. She had told herself she would not interfere. Thomas would not have interfered. He believed in letting people carry their own weight long enough to discover it wasn't as heavy as they feared. Elena had stood at that window for 10 minutes, watching Frank Bellini reduce her husband's guitar to $15, and had pressed one hand flat against the glass to keep herself from going inside. Then she watched a quiet man in a white linen shirt walk to the counter and take the room apart without raising his voice once. She pushed the door open. She saw Danny holding the guitar. She saw the $800 still sitting untouched on the counter. She looked at the man standing beside her son, and she recognized him the way anyone who had ever listened to a radio in 1964 would recognize him. The face, the dark, quiet eyes, the specific stillness. She didn't say his name. She looked directly at him and said, "You didn't have to do that." George Harrison looked back at her. He asked about Thomas, how long he'd played, where he learned, whether Danny had shown the same instinct for it. Elena answered plainly, the way exhausted people answer questions when they've stopped performing strength for anyone. She said Danny had taught himself 3 songs completely by ear at 9 years old, on a guitar that hadn't been properly tuned in 4 months. From memory alone, in a motel room off Highland Avenue, on a cracked transistor radio his father had left behind. George turned and looked at Danny. "Play something for me." Danny hesitated for 3 full seconds. Then he sat down on the wooden step near the front display case, settled the Stratocaster across his knee, and played the opening notes of something. Slowly, slightly uneven in tempo, but completely, unmistakably something. George Harrison's own composition, written for Patty Boyd, recorded in 1969, learned by an 11-year-old boy in a motel room, by listening to the same 4 bars repeat on a transistor radio until his fingers found the right positions in the dark. The shop was absolutely silent. George stood still for a long moment. Then he reached into his breast pocket, removed a receipt, wrote a name and a phone number, and handed it to Elena. "He teaches in Brentwood, the best I know. Call him Monday. He's expecting you." He had already called ahead from the payphone outside the record store next door while Danny was still wiping his face. If this story is showing you what quiet kindness actually looks like, subscribe right now. Because the stories that never made the headlines are always the ones that matter most. 3 weeks later, a small package arrived at Elena's new apartment in Culver City. No return address, no explanation. Danny opened it carefully at the kitchen table, and the 3 words handwritten inside made him sit down on the floor and not move for a very long time. Inside the package were 3 things. A fresh set of Ernie Ball guitar strings, 010 gauge, the same weight George Harrison used on every guitar he owned from 1968 forward. A handwritten note on plain white paper. 4 sentences, written in a careful, unhurried hand. To Danny, your father's music lives in your hands. The only person who can stop it is you, George. And beneath both, wrapped in a small square of brown cloth, a tortoiseshell guitar pick, worn smooth on one side from years of use. One of George's own, given without ceremony, given the way Thomas Kowalski would have given it. Danny held the pick for a long time that afternoon. He didn't play guitar. He just sat on the kitchen floor with it pressed between both palms. The way you hold something when you're not ready yet to put it down. 6 months of weekly lessons with Ray Pullman, a session musician who had played on more than 200 recordings across the 1960s and who told Danny plainly on the very first day, "George Harrison called me personally about you. That man does not make personal phone calls for just anybody." Rebuilt everything Danny believed was possible inside himself. He practiced 4 hours a day without being asked. He kept the Stratocaster in its case between sessions, the way his father always had. He carried the tortoiseshell pick in his left shirt pocket every single day until it was worn smooth on both sides. At 16, Danny played his first public performance at a small venue in Burbank. An original composition, 6 minutes long, written in the key of G. He dedicated it from the stage, out loud, to 2 people. His father, Thomas Kowalski, and the quiet man on Sunset Strip who gave me my father back. The audience didn't know who the quiet man was. But years later, when a journalist finally asked Danny the one question that had followed him his entire career, what he said next stopped the room cold. Danny Kowalski became a session guitarist. He worked the Los Angeles studio circuit through the late 1970s. Never famous, never on a magazine cover, but present on dozens of recordings that carried other people's names. The same quiet work his father had done. The same hands, the same listening first instinct every musician who worked alongside him recognized as something that couldn't be taught. He gave free guitar lessons to children in Culver City, the same neighborhood where Elena had found their first apartment in 1974. He charged nothing. He turned nobody away. The 1958 Fender Stratocaster hung on the wall of his teaching studio. Never played in sessions, never offered for sale, never touched by anyone but Danny. Beneath it, in a plain wooden frame, 4 sentences in a handwriting that was not his. George Harrison never spoke publicly about what happened on Sunset Strip that Tuesday afternoon. But in a 1979 interview, he said something Danny cut from a magazine and kept taped to his refrigerator for 20 years. The real music isn't in the notes. It's in the reason someone picked up the instrument in the first place. When the journalist finally asked what would have happened if George Harrison hadn't walked into that shop, Danny was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "He didn't step in for me that day. He stepped in for my father." If this story moved something in you, share it with one person who needs it today. Subscribe now. The stories that never made headlines are always the ones that matter most.